welcome. I'm Dr. Michael Greger coming to you from my stationary treadmill. I see your comment in the chat there, Richard. No jogging. I will not make people seasick. This is a CME-approved webinar, continuing medical education for doctors and other medical professionals. As such, I'm proud to declare I have no relevant financial relationships with ineligible companies to disclose. That kind of declaration statement is necessary given the long checkered past of big pharma secretly propping up paid shill to push their products. So now they just non-secretly pay paid shills to prop up their products, but I am not one of them. If at any time you run into any technical difficulties, there are live chat room staff standing by. Let me paste that link into the chat for everyone. There you go. If they're unable to help, we have the NutritionFacts.org staff here standing by too. And let me paste that into the chat as well. Okay. Please reserve the Q&A button you see in the Zoom window. Oh, did I not stop sharing? I'm sorry. I should have stopped sharing my blank video. All good now? Okay, where are we? Please reserve the Q&A button in the Zoom chat window there to ask content questions. Today's webinar is only an hour, but I've reserved lots of time for Q&A at the end, so please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A at any time throughout the webinar, and our Nutrition Facts team will compile them to be answered at the end. You don't have to worry about taking notes or anything, as after the webinar is over, we're not only going to send you a full recording of it, but also a free link to download all the videos in high def so you can see the videos in their full resolution glory. Today, we are going to be talking about a subject that has gotten surprisingly controversial: sunscreen, for both preventing skin aging and skin cancer. The pros and cons, the best way to apply it, and given the recent findings that the absorption of sunscreen chemicals in the bloodstream is greater than previously thought, how to choose the safest brands. All the videos I'm going to be showing you are eventually going to be up on NutritionFacts.org, but you get to see them right here, right now, and we start with the single most important thing, with a video entitled "The Single Most Important Thing to Maintaining Youthful Skin." Let's do this. Consider the single most important practice for maintaining youthful skin the daily application of sunscreen and taking other protective measures like wearing a hat. All the other things you can do for your skin pale in comparison, especially for those with pale skin. Up to 90% of visible facial aging among people with lighter skin tones is due to exposure to sunlight. Those with darker skin are relatively protected due to their built-in melanin sunscreen, but they're still affected. Sun damage in darker skin tends to be less about wrinkles and more about pigmentation issues, such as uneven skin tones, dark patches, and small dark bumps on the face. Either way, dermatologists now agree that there's nothing more important to slow the signs of aging than to protect your skin from the sun. To illustrate, here's a dramatic photo of a trucker who spent decades getting more sun on the left side of his face through his driver's side window, reminiscent of a Batman villain. Factors like sun exposure and smoking can make us look up to 11 years older. Compare that to extensive cosmetic surgery, a facelift and a neck lift, and removing excess skin from both upper and lower eyelids, and a forehead lift, which combined can make us look about 8 years younger. So a healthy lifestyle may work even better. Protecting your skin from the sun should be a lifelong endeavor. This can involve applying sunscreen, wearing sun protective clothing, hats, and sunglasses, and avoiding direct sunlight during the peak hours of 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., and instead seeking shady, covered areas. Sunbathing is frowned upon, even with sunscreens like zinc oxide or titanium dioxide that offer broad-spectrum protection against both UVA and UVB rays. We now know that other wavelengths, such as near-infrared, that are not covered by sunscreens also contribute to skin aging. Men and women who use tanning beds appear significantly older than those who don't, and white women who sunbathe appear years older than they actually are, similar to what is seen with smoking. UVA rays are primarily responsible for skin aging, whereas UVB are the rays that cause sunburn, but a broad-spectrum sunscreen covering both is recommended since both types of UV contribute to cancer risk. To prevent skin cancer, the American Academy of Dermatology recommends sunscreen with an SPF of 30 or higher, but an SPF even as low as 15 can help prevent skin aging. How do we know? Because it's been put to the test. Despite the widespread belief that the use of sunscreen would prevent skin aging, all we had was data on hairless mice. That is, until 10 years ago. 900 adults were randomized either to years of daily sunscreen use or to continue with their own discretionary use. It was considered unethical to withhold protection by giving people placebo sunscreen. In the end, 77% in the recommended daily sunscreen group were applying sunscreen at least 3 to 4 days per week, compared with only 33% in the discretionary use group. Would that be enough of a difference to make a difference? Yes. There was significantly less skin aging in the instructed daily use group. In fact, they suffered no detectable increase in skin aging over the 4.5-year study. The researchers concluded regular sunscreen use retards skin aging in healthy middle-aged men and women. OK, so to reiterate, there's nothing more important to slow the signs of aging than to protect your skin from the sun. This involves avoiding direct sunlight, since there are skin aging wavelengths not covered by sunscreens, and wearing a daily SPF 30+ sunscreen proven to slow aging in a randomized controlled trial. OK, but what if you care less about how you look and more about avoiding cancer? Has sunscreen been similarly proven to prevent skin cancer? Let's find out in my next video. Does sunscreen really prevent skin cancer? Let's find out. Decades ago, studies started bubbling up, reporting that not only was the use of sunscreen not found to be protective against skin cancer, but it was associated with significantly elevated risk. But subsequent studies offered the obvious explanation of this paradox. People who use sunscreen are more likely to be sunbathers. That's like finding those who use motorcycle helmets are more likely to die on the highway. It's not that sunscreen and helmets aren't protective, it's just that they're associated with engagement in risky activities. But you don't know until you put it to the test. As I noted in my last video, randomized controlled trials have shown that regular use of sunscreen can arrest visible signs of skin aging, including biopsy-proven reductions in UV-related skin damage. But are there interventional trials proving sunscreen can prevent cancer? Yes. Organ transplant recipients are highly susceptible to skin cancers because they have to be given immune suppressants to prevent organ rejection. A group of 120 organ recipients were equally informed about sun protection measures, but half were given free broad-spectrum SPF 50+ sunscreen for daily application to their head, neck, forearms, and hands. After 2 years, there were 9 new basal carcinomas in the control group versus only 2 in the sunscreen group. That sounds good, but it may have just been a fluke. In contrast, there was a highly significant difference in the proportion of patients who got new invasive squamous cell carcinoma, 8 new cases in the control group versus 0 in the sunscreen group. But wait until you hear about what happened to their actinic keratoses, the precancerous growths that can turn into skin cancer. They all started out covered in them, a total of 191 detected in each group. In the subsequent 24 months, the control group developed 82 new ones. How many did the sunscreen group develop? -102. More than 100 precancerous growths in the sunscreen group spontaneously regressed and vanished completely, compared to 82 new growths developing in the control group without a single one disappearing. Their bodies, even in their immunocompromised state, could heal itself once it just stopped being bombarded with so many cancer-causing rays. Other randomized controlled trials have shown similar findings, but generalizability is limited. The studies all used high-risk populations, for example, those living in subtropical climates or with a personal history of precancerous lesions. So cancer prevention efficacy in the general population would be expected to be less. On the other hand, the studies could also have underestimated the impact since they were relatively short-term, not exceeding 4 years, and ethically had to allow the control group participants to slather on their own sunscreen, which would dilute the difference between groups. For maximum effectiveness, sunscreen needs to be applied properly, which apparently rarely happens in the real world. In a study of nearly 5,000 skiers and snowboarders, almost no one, only about 4%, were fully compliant with sunscreen recommendations. First, there's the amount. The FDA standard is 2 milligrams per square centimeter. What does that mean? Use the teaspoon rule. 1 teaspoon for your face, head, and neck. 1 for the front of your torso, another for your back, 1 teaspoon for each arm, and 2 teaspoons for each leg. That's a total of 9 teaspoons. That's about the total volume equivalent of a golf ball or a shot glass to help you visualize it. Unfortunately, the average sunscreen user may only apply a quarter of the recommended amount. This is why high SPF sunscreens are often recommended, like 50+ SPF. Although the FDA recommends a minimum SPF of only 15 to prevent skin cancer, under normal consumer conditions, even an SPF of 50 may effectively give you only an SPF of 12.5 because most people don't put on enough. Randomized, double-blind, head-to-head split-face experiments, where you're randomized to apply one sunscreen to one side of your face and another sunscreen to the other side, show that in real-life use, SPF 100+ sunscreen works significantly better than SPF 50+ sunscreen. More than 50% of the participants were sunburned more on their SPF 50+ side, compared to only about 5% on their SPF 100+ side. Now, a potential downside of higher SPF sunscreens is that they could provide a false sense of security. Those randomized to an SPF 30 sunscreen ended up spending more cumulative time in the sun than those receiving an SPF 10 sunscreen, as much as 5 times longer in some cases. What else? Well, people tend to remember to use sunscreen on a sunny day at the beach, but sun protection is needed even on cloudy days, since the UV rays are not dampened as much as visible light. There's even a phenomenon known as cloud enhancement, where overcast skies can sometimes result in even more UV reaching the Earth's surface compared to clear skies. Sunscreen labels often suggest waiting at least 15 minutes after application before going outdoors, but when put to the test, sunscreen was found to start working immediately, with the full effect apparent by minute 10. However, if water resistance is required, it may be prudent to wait the full 15 to 30 minutes after application before taking a dip. The terms waterproof or sweatproof appear to be meaningless marketing, as no difference in retention was noted between quote-unquote waterproof products and those that were merely labeled water-resistant. Both were better than non-water-resistant products, though, which lost nearly all their protective effects within 20 minutes of water immersion. The suggestion that sunscreen should be reapplied every 2 to 3 hours only applies under conditions in which it is rinsed off by water or sweat, or rubbed off by friction from clothing or sand. Even after allowing sunscreen to dry first for 20 minutes, between 15 and 60% of its protective effect can be lost after contact with sand. Otherwise, if the recommended amount is applied and the sunscreen layer is not disturbed, SPF can be maintained for as long as 8 hours. Oh, tons of content in that video. I think the coolest thing was that study showing the spontaneous regression of more than 100 precancerous growths in the sunscreen group, vanishing completely, right? Their bodies, even in that immunocompromised state, could heal itself when we just stop bombarding them with so many cancer-causing rays, right? It reminds me of the famous lifestyle heart trial from Dean Ornish, showing that you could open up arteries without drugs, without surgery, just putting people on a plant-based diet and lifestyle program, suggesting that their bodies want to be healthy all along, and all we had to do was remove the fork we were stabbing ourselves 3 times a day with, and the body could just heal naturally once we take away the kind of noxious stimuli. So in this case, it's the UV rays from the sun. Okay, so, teaspoon rule, maybe go 50+ SPF, and that sunny days, cloudy days, that cloud enhancement thing I never heard of, that's wild. But okay, the one thing I didn't cover, which sunscreen is best? And that's what I'm going to be wrapping up with, the best type of sunscreen to use. What kind of sunscreen should you use? Cream-based is preferable to spray on, since the completeness of application is more readily visualized. To help with adequate coverage, spray-on sunscreen should be rubbed on immediately after spraying. Aerosolized sunscreens are flammable and can combust on skin upon exposure to an open flame, even after the sunscreen has dried. What's more, the safety of breathing in aerosolized sunscreen chemicals has not been adequately studied, though frankly, the same thing could be said about rubbing them on your skin. The concerns surrounding sunscreen safety are threefold: increased intentional sun exposure, vitamin D deficiency, and untoward effects from systemic absorption of sunscreen chemicals. In the 1800s, we first learned that UVB caused sunburns and formulated sunscreens to block it. Nearly a century later, we learned about the contribution of UVA. Now, a full century later, we are realizing that infrared and visible light may also be contributing to cancer and premature skin aging. Sunlight comes to us in three major bands: visible light, ultraviolet, and infrared. Visible light includes the colors of the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, or Roy G. Biv. Ultraviolet, UV, is to the right of violet in Roy G. Biv, and infrared to the left of red. Sunscreen can protect us against the free radical damage of UV, but half of the free radical formation in our skin from the sun may be from the visible or infrared spectrums, which sunscreens may not adequately cover. So that's where sun avoidance strategies come in. But you can imagine how shade-seeking could be undermined by the solacement of a sunscreen security blanket. What about vitamin D? The theoretical concern about sunscreen affecting vitamin D status does not seem to manifest in the real world, likely because the UV dose necessary for vitamin D production is so low well before skin turns a pinker shade. However, concerns about the systemic absorption of sunscreen chemicals were underscored by the recent FDA bombshell that not a single one of sunscreen chemicals in current use can be considered generally recognized as safe. Only two active ingredients got the green light: the two non-chemical mineral sunscreens, titanium dioxide and zinc oxide. The revelation was based on a growing body of evidence that transdermal, meaning through-the-skin absorption of sunscreen chemicals, was greater than we previously thought, raising unevaluated safety concerns. Unevaluated because we previously didn't think so much got into our bloodstreams. In 2019, a study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that under maximum usage conditions over a period of days, the blood levels of all the sunscreen chemicals they tested exceeded the FDA threshold that could potentially waive further safety testing. Then in 2020, they found that just a single application of all the chemical sunscreens they tested surpassed the threshold. Now, just because they're absorbed into our system doesn't necessarily mean they're unsafe. It just means they need to be tested for safety, which the FDA determined the multi-billion-dollar sunscreen industry has so far failed to do. The FDA concluded that two ingredients can be considered safe: zinc oxide and titanium dioxide, and two can be considered unsafe: PABA and trolamine salicylate. And the other 12 ingredients that are currently marketed have yet to be sufficiently safety tested. According to a review of more than 700 sunscreen brands, it appears PABA and trolamine are no longer being marketed in sunscreens sold in the United States, but they still may be available in other countries. Until the data are in on the rest of the chemical sunscreens, I would recommend sticking to the two mineral sunscreens. Historically, they've tended to be thicker and whiter, which could lead to even more severe underdosing, but newer micronized formulations with smaller mineral particle sizes tend to be less noticeable. This is particularly an issue for those with darker skin. The average built-in SPF of black skin, also known in the medical literature as quote-unquote ethnic skin, or SOC skin of color, is about 13 naturally, compared with only about 3 for white skin. Though there haven't been any interventional studies on sunscreen effectiveness for skin cancer prevention in people with dark skin, SPF 13 is not considered sufficient sun protection. So the American Academy of Dermatology recommends regular sunscreen use with an SPF of 30 or higher for people of all skin types. Unfortunately, only about 12% of non-Hispanic blacks and 31% of Hispanics report regularly using sunscreen, compared to about 44% of non-Hispanic whites. Despite this, the incidence of melanoma, the deadliest skin cancer, is 5 times lower in Hispanics compared to whites, and more than 25 times lower among blacks. However, the mortality rate, if you do get it, is higher among African Americans, presumed to be due from delayed diagnosis. Okay, so in short, only 2 sunscreen active ingredients can be considered safe at this time, and that's the 2 so-called mineral sunscreens, titanium dioxide and zinc oxide. Though remember in the first part of the video talking about how that may really only cover UV, the ultraviolet range, and so sun avoidance is still important, since maybe half the free radicals created by sun exposure are from the non-covered spectrum. So avoidance, in addition to using good sunscreens, is still important. Absolutely outrageous that safety testing wasn't done by industry, but now they're going to be forced to, and it's about time. All right, Q&A time. Happy to talk about anything that came up today or any related topics of skin aging in general. Got a whole chapter on it in how not to age, and so we could bring up the pre-release sneak preview and go through anything you'd like. Let me just give Nutrition Facts staff 5 minutes to compile the questions that have been submitted so far through the Q&A button. It's not too late if you want to ask one now, and then I will be right back. Okay, let's do this. Okay, let me pull up the questions. Okay, move this around. Okay, what do we got here? Sunscreen questions. All right. What ingredients are the safest for lip products containing optimal sunscreen efficacy? So glad you answered. You can actually get melanoma of the lip, deadly skin cancer of the lip, just like you can get skin cancer anywhere. And so the safest would be the same thing: titanium dioxide, zinc oxide, the 2 mineral sunscreens for lip products as well. I'm so glad you asked that question. People may not think of that. Okay, when returning indoors after sunscreen skin application, is showering recommended to prevent possible adverse issues from sunscreen chemical skin absorption? What duration is safest to have sunscreen on the skin before washing it off? And the answer to that question is do not wear chemical sunscreens, because we cannot presume them to be safe. Now, if you do have a chemical sunscreen, would it be better to wash it off? That's a good question. Like, I don't know how long it takes for that. I'd have to go back to that study to see how long after application does it get absorbed. Remember that study showed just a single application could exceed the levels that exceed the threshold levels from the FDA in terms of needing to require toxicity testing. So it gets into your bloodstream. What are the kinetics of it? Like, is it like within the first hour, or does it take like 8 hours or something? And can you just wash it up? That's a good question. But so that's kind of a good kind of curiosity question. But the true answer is just don't use those chemical sunscreens until we know they're safe, period. And you don't have to worry about washing off titanium, the mineral sunscreens, unless, it's unsightly. Unless you get some of those micronized versions, it can leave kind of like a white residue. And so if you don't want white residue on your face, then, you can wash it off, but that's strictly cosmetic purposes. Those minerals don't get absorbed to your skin. It's the chemicals that do. Okay, next up. Any contraindications? Oh, that's a fancy doctory word. I'm sorry I can't give props to the questioners, because I just when the team pulls them together, they don't tell me who asked it. They just show me the questions. But thank you for everyone who put in questions. Anyway, any contraindications, meaning any circumstances in which you would not want to. So any circumstances in which you would not want to apply moisturizer, insect repellents, and/or witch hazel whilst applying sunscreen, and is there any preferred order of application? Sunscreen, the cream sunscreens actually have a moisturizer base. So presumably wouldn't have to add moisturizer on top of moisturizer. But in terms of insect repellents and all that stuff, trying to think. Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine. It's not like it's gonna. I guess if you added a whole bunch of witch hazel and was really sloppy, you could kind of rinse off some of the sunscreen, but that probably wouldn't happen. Probably just rub it around good. So yeah, I don't think it should matter in terms of order of application. Okay, next question. Is clothing marketed with inherent sunscreen absorbed? Is that absorbed when you sweat? Is this UPF clothing effective? And if so, is it effective enough to forego topical sunscreen while wearing the clothing? Okay, great question. Now, most like UPF, most sun protective clothing is not actually embedded with anything. It's just the natural blocking, physical blocking. So like every piece of clothing, unless it's like some super sheer, lingerie or something, every clothing has some kind of blocking abilities. And you can tell whether it's blocking abilities or not by you take the clothing, you take your shirt, and you look up at the sun. And if you're like, well, try not to look up at the sun, but you know what I mean? Like if light shines through, well, then it's not very good. But so usually the sun protective clothing is just a denser weave or a thicker material. And so you put it up and you're like, oh, you can't see the sun. Well, if you can't see the sun through the clothing, it blocks the sun. So now, is there some clothing that actually has some embedded chemical? If there is, I don't think you should wear it, because then you'd be worried about the chemical safety once again. And so the question is, well, do you need to worry about, like, you need to put sunscreen underneath your clothing? It depends on how effective it is. So for anti-aging, you need SPF, not UPF. I don't know what UPF came from. The question here, but no, SPF 15 for anti-aging, SPF 30 is the recommendations for preventing cancer. And so if the clothing is rated as SPF 10, well then, if you're going to get a lot of direct sunlight, you want to put some sunblock on underneath it. Okay, next, I've heard some doctors, including dermatologists, say that most skin damage from sun exposure is done before age 12. Is that true? Well, I mean, if you think about that randomized controlled trial where they, had people put more sunscreen or less sunscreen, these are people, I forget the ages, but middle age. And so late in life, they had this amazing protection that they didn't show any signs of skin aging after daily application of sunscreen over a 4.5 year study, significantly better than the group that only did it a few times a week. And so showing that you can prevent aging at any time. When you're a kid, you have this remarkable capacity to heal. But I think what you may be thinking of is in terms of skin cancer risk. So if you had a lot of sunburns when you were a kid, you are at elevated risk, even if the rest of your life you are in a burqa. And that is because these so-called epithelial cancers, these cancers that like linings of organs, whether it's breast glands or colon or prostate or skin or liver, it can take decades to grow. So, the breast cancer you get at age, 50 could have been from, some kind of teenage exposure. So it's even more important if you got a lot of sunburns when you were a kid, nothing you can do about it now. You can prevent your own kids from getting sunburned in the first place. That's very important. But you just have to be more careful to protect your skin from the sun. And again, there's that really hopeful study showing that your body can actually reverse some of the progression towards cancer just by protecting your skin from the sun, just from the UV rays, not even from the sun completely. Okay, next question. Are kids' sunscreen products and sunscreen needs any different? Does using brands of sunscreen labeled for babies mean that they are safer? It's all about the active ingredients, right? We want the mineral sunscreens regardless. I don't know maybe the baby sunscreens are higher SPF, but as long as the SPF is there and you're using the right ingredients, then that's the most important thing. And again, one could argue it's even more important for kids because of that lifetime skin cancer risk. That'd be the only difference. Okay, I take astaxanthin, 4 milligrams a day, which is this carotenoid pigment to help me tan naturally. Any thoughts on this? I have not looked into astaxanthin in terms of safety, but there is another carotenoid called canthaxanthin, which causes something called gold dust retinopathy. You can actually see it in the back of your eyeball. But I have not looked into this. So that is a supplement I would not recommend taking, but have not looked into the safety of astaxanthin. But thanks to your question, I will add it to my list of research topics. And this is super exciting. I don't know if I've mentioned this anywhere publicly, but on September 1st, we have 2 new people starting at NutritionFacts.org, 2 nutrition PhDs who are going to help me script videos. And so, when you say, oh, why don't you do a video about X? And I say, I'll add it to my list. And then like a year later, you say, weren't you going to do a question about this? I'm like, it's still on my list. Well, now I'm going to have 2 people helping me churn through that list. So I'll be able to cover more in depth. I'm super excited. Anyway, okay. And hundreds of applicants. It took us months, but we arrived. We're really happy with our 2 applicants. And I can't wait. In just 2 weeks, we're going to get them started. Anyway, okay. What next question? What is the difference between face sunscreen and body sunscreens? Is this just marketing or is it an actual product difference? I think it's just marketing. Again, what matters is the ingredients and how potent the protection is. The SPF rating. Okay, next, what is a healthy amount of sun exposure before needing sunscreen? How much sun exposure per day or month is safe to avoid any cancer? Ideally, none. I mean, we should be putting sunscreen on in the morning before we go outside and have it on all day. And so yeah, I mean, we really should try to avoid direct sun exposure when we can. And as I said, well, wait a second, what about vitamin D? As I said in the video, it turns out that your body's super good making vitamin D, even if you wear sunscreen. Okay, I mentioned that next question. I mentioned near infrared affecting skin. Can I comment on far infrared, as in far infrared saunas? That's a great question. That's something else on my list is I wanted to look into saunas. I did one video on saunas, but it was like, steam saunas. In terms of detoxification from heavy metals like lead, which is really interesting. So that's already on the site, but I haven't looked at infrared saunas. Another thing I haven't looked at is like the cold plunge stuff. There's all these people saying there's all this data suggesting that like exposure to cold, cryotherapy, blah, blah, blah is helpful. Maybe, I don't know. I got to check out the literature. Something else on my list. Okay. So my answer to that question is I don't know. Great question. Next question, can you develop a greater tolerance for skin exposure without damage to your skin? Well, you can certainly develop a greater tolerance. You can tan, and that's your body trying to protect itself from the rays, and so you're less likely to get sunburned. But you're damaging your skin en route. So that's not the way to do it. Okay, next, if I already had skin cancer, am I more susceptible going forward on that spot? You absolutely are more susceptible going forward, not necessarily on that spot. In fact, there shouldn't be a spot anymore. They should have cut it out, presumably. But definitely, in fact, there are randomized controlled trials showing that people in exactly your situation can significantly cut down on your risk of subsequent cancer by using daily sunscreen. Because you're so susceptible. The reason that they choose high-risk populations to study is because then you don't have to do as long a study and as large of a study, right? I mean, because you want to have lots of skin cancer in both groups so you can see if there's actually a difference with whatever you do. So you definitely are at higher risk, so it's particularly important for you to take care. Okay, next question. Are there particular herbs that you can recommend for being anti-skin cancer and their properties? I've heard that green tea has such properties. Oh, well, I have got, I wonder if the video's up. So I've got a couple videos talking about basically things you can eat to get sunscreen from the inside out. It's a cool, like there was a cool video talking about how if you have how berries, like eating berries before you go outside significantly extends the time before you get sunburned, but because the antioxidants get deposited in your skin and protect against free radicals, whereas something like alcohol is a pro-oxidant, it eats up your free radicals. So I talk about how, so they did like strawberry daiquiri kind of study. Oh no, they did screwdriver studies, like orange juice versus orange juice with vodka, and showed how much quicker you sunburn after eating vodka versus various fruits and vegetables. So check out that video. And I know in the book, I actually talk about different foods that can offer that kind of skin protection from the inside out. The nice thing about that, kind of boosting the natural SPF of your skin by eating healthy foods. And I forget if green tea, it was among them. I know it's certainly been tested. I forget which way it went. The nice thing is it's there all the time. And in all the hard to reach places. And so you don't have to think about putting it on. At the same time, the SPF is relatively low, and so you still have to wear sunblock, but it's kind of a complementary strategy. So it's there all the time and everywhere, but not enough to offer ideal protection. So you add the sunblock on top of it. And so there'll be more videos coming out about that. And if anyone's really interested, we actually go to the book and see what those listed foods are and look at the green tea specifically. See, there were studies on both topical green tea and ingested green tea, and I forget which found which. Anyway, okay, can I cover Fudex topical cream, which is a medication used on skin to prevent excuse me. Can I cover Fudex topical cream, which is evidently a medication used on skin to treat cancerous skin growths, aka chemo cream? I am not aware of chemo cream. I'm sure all the dermatologists in the audience today know much more about it than I am. I was recommended it after finding okay. I'm coughing into my elbow, even though there's nobody around. That's good. After this person has some rough spots on their face that would turn precancerous, but after seeing terrifying videos of people having skin that looked like third-degree burns, I did not use it. So what are the pros and cons of chemo cream? I have no idea. I've never even heard about it, but definitely something to look into. There's no such thing as safe and effective. If it's effective, then there's some risk. And the question is, do the benefits outweigh the harms? And that you have to figure out on a drug-by-drug basis. All right. Are there countries manufacturing better or more modern sunscreen formulations than the USA where we can purchase from? Well, you don't need to go anywhere outside the USA because you can get the mineral sunscreens right here. And so you don't need to worry about it, right? So yeah, those are safe. Do natural oils, avocado, peach, grapeseed, provide any protection against UVA rays, as I've seen products that say it do? Well, if the product says it does something, yeah, you can never trust anything. Now, it's possible that something like grapeseed oil has some antioxidants that actually may offer some protection, but I would highly doubt it. I would not rely on on oils to protect against UV rays. Okay, is it okay to only use water without soap to wash our hands after putting on sunscreen? We don't want to get sunscreen on our food. I don't use no, well, so if your sunscreen is not water resistant, it'll wash right off just with water, even without soap. And so you wouldn't want to do that. And if you don't want to get sunscreen on your food, you don't have to eat with your hands. That would be probably the way to go. Don't eat with your hands. Okay, what do you think of the Spurty UVB phototherapy lamp vitamin D lamps that allows people to make vitamin D without going in the sun? Well, I mean, if it's turning out UV rays, then presumably we're gonna run into the same problems. And so, yeah, I'm presuming that's not good for skin aging or skin cancer risk. And again, you can get all the vitamin D you need from sun, even when you're protecting yourself from sun. Now, if you don't go outside, then you're not going to get enough vitamin D, right? I mean, your roof is SPF like 1,000,000, whatever, right? You don't get exposed inside. And so if you're like, institutionalized, they do these studies of the elderly in nursing homes, where they never get outside, you can get really vitamin D deficient, in which case you don't need a UV lamp. You just need to give them vitamin D supplements. I would recommend 2,000 international units of vitamin D3 a day for someone getting inadequate sun exposure. And I am very much an institutionalized elder in terms of my vitamin D levels. And that is because I am inside all day reading articles, so you don't have to, and really don't get out much. That'll change when I'm on the road coming next year for the new book. But yeah, so I'm actually taking vitamin D every day because I get inadequate sun exposure. Okay, there's my vitamin. The next question: what are my vitamin D recommendations? There you go. Okay, is there a sunscreen that does not have metals in it? Oh, there's tons of sunscreen, but we don't know if they're safe, right? These chemical sunscreens that don't have titanium or zinc, but we don't know if they're safe because they're absorbed into the skin, and we know there are a couple that were definitely not safe. And so there's lots of sunscreens without metals, but until we know they're safe, I would not use them. Next question. What sunscreen options are available if your skin's very sensitive, even the mineral sunscreens? So when you say sensitive, usually sensitive skin, usually what you do with sensitive skin is you moisturize your skin, and presumably sunscreens would be moisturizers. Now, can people actually develop like a titanium or zinc allergy? That's a good question. I've never heard of such a thing, but you can. I've certainly heard of nickel allergy. Some people can't handle things with the metal nickel in it and actually run into real problems. So I don't know if that would be the same. So I'm not sure what you mean by very sensitive, like you break out in a rash. If so, I'm presuming it's not actually the zinc or the titanium, but it's like all the other ingredients that they throw in. And so you may want to try different ones till you find one that doesn't make you break out or whatever you're describing as being sensitive. Next, do sunglasses without tint work the same? What about UV blocking? Oh, windows in your house. Do sunglasses without a tint work the same? We didn't actually cover the damage that the sun can do to probably the most sensitive tissue at all, the back of your eye. Imagine, okay, yeah, your sun is getting toasted, your skin's getting toasted, but you actually have a magnifying glass in your lenses, your eye, which are focusing the sun's rays right to the back of your eye. So actually cataracts are thought to be your body's way to protect your retina. The yellowing of your cornea, the outer part of your eye, is to block some of those high energy blue light that is damaging your retina. And when people get cataract surgery, they actually can accelerate their retinal degeneration because all of a sudden they have more free radical damage in the back of their eye. So what do? You protect yourself. There's all sorts of polarized sunglasses, which significantly cut down on light, and you'd want them, not the little fashionable ones where light can get in from all sides, but you want ones that really do cover your eyes. And UV blocking windows in the house. Now, so I think glass is UV blocking in itself. Like if you're in a car, you should not get sunburned if your windows are up. So even if you're like, you have your arm, here you are, and like the sun is coming in, you should not get sunburned because UV rays really should be stopped by the glass. Now, whether or not, but it probably obviously doesn't block other rays that may be causing skin aging. But that's not something I've looked into. Because vitamin D synthesis requires exposure to the sun, I allow myself 20 minutes a day in the sun for this purpose with a hat, of course. I don't know why, of course, but okay. Beyond this, I will apply sunscreen. Is a strategy a good idea, or should I always use sunscreen? Okay, so as I said in the video, you will make vitamin D even with sunscreen on. So I would rather those 20 minutes with sunscreen on. No reason to go out every day and spend 20 minutes in the sun. To get your vitamin D. You will make all the vitamin D you need with sunscreen on. What's the latest research on the possible link between sunscreen and frontal fibrosing alopecia? I have never heard of any such link. I can pop it into PubMed real quick just to see if anything pops up. Okay, sunscreen. That is not something I ran into. Well, there are 36 articles. Let us look at the latest systematic review and meta-analysis. That's the quickie way. If you just had really a very little amount of time to answer some research question, you look at the latest systematic review meta-analysis. Is that perfect? By no means, but it's, if you have limited time, this is what you can do. We have limited time, so let's do this. And what does it say? Bum, 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 bum. Okay, let's download it and find out. Okay, there it is. Okay, this was okay. Blah blah blah. Systematic review was done. So there's been 9 good studies on it, and dun dun dun. Okay, come on. Odds ratio. So yeah, the use of sunscreen is associated with a higher risk of developing frontal fibrosing alopecia. Although the exact mechanism is not clear, they think it's maybe because of I don't know. Oh, they think it may be because of oxybenzone, which is one of these chemicals in chemical sunscreens that may be kind of irritating the skin. So this may be limited to chemical sunscreens, although they didn't look at it specifically. But good question. So this was a 2022 systematic review in the Journal of the American Academy of Dermatology, suggesting that, and so perhaps that's another reason to stay away from chemical sunscreens. Okay, well, let's go back to our questions here. But thank you for that question. I that's not something I ran across when I was doing, because most I was looking at it for aging, but of course the cancer naturally popped up with that. Okay, why does squamous cancer, meaning squamous cell carcinoma, show up on legs or covered areas more than other areas? I wonder if you're talking about melanoma. So melanoma, you can get in all sorts of crazy areas. So there are some skin cancers, like basal cell, that show up where you'd expect them to show up, like, top of the head or on the nose, or, where they just get a lot of sun exposure. And other skin cancers that can appear weird kind of places, even like, toenails and crazy things like that. and may have less to do with UV ray exposure. Why does that have that distribution? I don't think we know. That's a good question. Is one application in the morning sufficient for all day protection? That study, right? As long as you are not rubbing it off or wiping it off, or it's not, you're not sweating so much that you're kind of dripping it off, rinsing it off with sweat. 8 hours. It should last 8 hours. So yeah, application in the morning should be sufficient, unless you're rolling around the sand or something and it's rubbing it off. Okay, could I please address the effect of sunscreen chemicals on coral reefs and ocean life? Fantastic question. Is not in my wheelhouse. And So I do not know what the effect of sunscreen chemicals on coral reef and ocean life is. Sorry. Any foods that can help slow skin aging. You got it. I got a whole chapter on it. Let me see if there's okay, let me I have a whole anti-wrinkle diet section. Let me let's share it. Let's do it. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen here. And we'll read a paragraph or two. How about that? Okay, share screen. PDF expert. Okay. Okay, here we go. Anti-wrinkle diet. So if you this is for reversing wrinkles. Okay. Is there any way to reduce them? Don't eat a lot of meat and junk, eat a lot of fruit, vegetables, nuts. Okay, these are associations. But there are interventional trials. And so I wonder if this video is already up. I made all these special videos for the just for the book. And let me just check really quick if that's up. Oh yeah, okay, here we go. I'm gonna put this in the chat. Where is it? Well, you can just so this is up. So if you go to c.nf/anti-wrinkle, there's a video how to naturally reduce wrinkles with food, which on NutritionFacts.org right now. And so there's that video, and then there's been interventional data on almonds, flax, seeds, soy, and mangoes. And do they actually work when put to the test? Yes, and no. So yes to almonds, yes to flax, yes to soy, no to mangoes. I love mangoes. Too bad. The paucity of interventional trials limits the confidence we can put, but the best approximations were summed up in a dermatology review entitled "An Anti-Wrinkle Diet." Dietary defense strategies include antioxidant-rich foods. That's good. So that's, berries and greens. Anti-inflammatory foods. That's foods with lots of fiber. So whole plant foods. Anti-glycation foods. These are foods with low in glycotoxins. So low in advanced glycation end products. So basically low in dry cooked meat. Blah, blah, blah. Broccoli is good for DNA repair. And food shown to block collagen and elastin, which is the elastic component of skin, at least in vitro. Garlic, turmeric, and ginger. All right, already all good foods. So the best approximation for an anti-wrinkle diet is one centered around whole plant foods. But then I talk about some vegan vulnerabilities, which all center around getting sufficient vitamin B12. I think I talked about in the collagen lecture. Anyway, okay. All will be, so lots more juicy stuff in the book. Oh, we got 2 minutes left. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing that. Just want to let everybody know the next webinar coming down the pike. More CME webinars coming, all sorts of juicy topics. The next one, October 6th. So in your calendar, put October 6th, 2 p.m. Eastern. This is an exciting one. I'll be giving my new How Not to Age presentation based on the new book. I've given it at a few conferences so far. I was just at the ICNM, the International Conference on Nutrition and Medicine Conference here in DC. So if you happen to be here, you were lucky. I'm also going to be giving it at the International Plant-Based Nutrition Healthcare Conference. That is next month, so you can see it live. That's going to be in the kind of LA area, Palm Desert. So it's like an hour away from LA, Southern California. And then I'm going to give it in Colorado, Denver, Colorado in October at the American College of Lifestyle Medicine Conference. And then I'll be on the road all next year. Well, first half of next year, hopefully coming to your hometown and seeing in person. But if you're not going to be in one of those cities and not going to be able to see it, don't worry. I'm going to be giving it like as a webinar live on October 6th, 2 p.m. Eastern. Check it out. I'm super excited for that. And make sure you're signed up to the NutritionFacts.org email newsletter for all future details. And how do you sign up? Well, one way you can do it, if you're not already signed up, is to just point your phone at the screen right here, the QR code, and you can subscribe that way. So thank you so much, everybody. I hope you learned a ton. I certainly learned a ton, as I always do when I put together this information. And so, and I'm all excited to share it. And now I've finally been able to, and then eventually we'll share it with the world once all those videos eventually make it out on NutritionFacts.org. Thanks so much. And we'll leave this. Am I not? The screen sharing is paused. Why is my screen sharing paused? I'm going to stop sharing. Let's try this again. Screen share. Boom. Does that work? Now it works. Okay. Sorry about that. If the QR code wasn't up, it is up now. We'll leave it up for a few minutes. Thanks so much. Everyone, take care of yourself.